You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Heat. We are here with Gutierrez. Really excited to have you on to help us talk about Dwyane Wade's career ahead of his Hall of Fame induction. I really can't think of many people better to talk about or talk to because you covered him basically his whole career. So first thing, thanks for jumping on. Yeah. I want to get to your podcast, 4 Years of Heat, in a minute, but I do want to just start with an easy one here. Just what was it like covering young D Wade? And was there ever a point where you thought that Dwyane could be a future Hall of Famer?
You know, it's funny. I've told this story, I think, quite a few times, and I think the only person who's probably heard it every single time would be Ira Winderman. But when we started covering, when we first started covering him preseason, I remember I was in Puerto Rico. We were in Puerto Rico, and I forget who the opponent was, to be honest. But there was just one play where Dwyane was the point guard, and they just ran. I forget what kind of action it was at the top, but it ended up being in a lob to Dwyane, from Eddie Jones to Dwyane. And I was like, wow, that's an athletic point guard. If that's what they're going to do with him, that's an athletic point guard. And then, you know, we didn't really see too much that I can remember in the preseason, but then we got to game one, and it was in Philadelphia against Allen Iverson and the Sixers. And his first, I think he made his first shot as a jumper, made a couple more, just was looking really just easy. Like, it looked easy to him in his first NBA game. And I leaned over to Ira and I said, it's going to be fun covering this Michael Jordan kid, because it's who he reminded me of. Like, I remember a play I think it was that same game in Puerto Rico where they were on defense, and, you know, he follows his defender baseline, and I forget who it was posting it up, but, you know, he pulled the Jordan move, the sneaky little comeback, and Jason Kidd did it a lot too, and just slapped the ball out. And I was just had like deja vu, you know, and the way he was built, the way he moved, the way he, pulled up sometimes for jumpers. And so I immediately said that to him, and we kind of giggled about it. But that whole first year, we all just kind of saw it. We saw it the first year. We saw, why he should sort of be starting and playing point guard, which is not his position in a team that was sort of, probably pieced together. And it was amazing from the very start. And I remember the way that first season was just so much fun. And at the end, the way it ended with Dwyane Wade against the Pacers in Game 6 at home, Dwyane Wade on the bench. And it was one of those where you're just like, no. Now, I'm sorry, Stan, but no, like this guy's going to be spectacular. He might have had a moment right there because they were, I think, only down 2 or 3 or something like that. And the way it ended, I was just like, that's never going to happen again. This guy's going to be phenomenal for the rest of his career. And, you kind of fast forward at off season, you get Shaquille O'Neal, and all of a sudden, everything changes for him.
We could jump around, not even in chronological order, with Wade's career. And I think we're going to end up doing that, because one of the things I wanted to ask you right away here was one of your earlier episodes in 4 Years of Heat, which covers the Big Three Miami Heat era. I encourage our listeners to go ahead and check that out. It's really good. And again, like, one of the early parts of it was kind of going back to the pep rally after they had signed LeBron and Bosh and D Wade. And you mentioned in the show that was originally intended to just be to celebrate Dwyane Wade's just re-signing, right? Just to bring him back. And then obviously LeBron and Chris Bosh get involved. And then that same day, Wade agrees to take less money so that Udonis Haslem can come back. So I just want to ask, like, in your reporting of all of this stuff from 10 years ago, did anything you come across strike you as new or surprising in terms of just D Wade's involvement in the formation of the Big Three?
A little bit, even though I had heard this from Brian Windhorst or from people before. What Brian Windhorst had talked about with Dwyane going for a second interview with Chicago a second meeting with Chicago. He's not applying for a job. And
they are, if anything. Yeah.
Right. And that it was, he was trying to bring the Big Three sort of blueprint to Chicago because he was nervous about the idea of everything working out in Miami. I thought that was something of a surprise, but it also just kind of spoke to, we all talked about this like it was Dwyane doing the Heat a solid. This was Dwyane doing Dwyane a solid. Like whatever organization it was going to be with, he wanted to play with those people. And it's not a knock on Dwyane. It's not a knock on loyalty. It's just where the NBA has been going. You look out for yourself. You're an individual. You're not, you don't belong to any sort of team. And so I think that part was a little bit surprising. But I think what was the most sort of telling or most just obvious when you go back and sort of revisit all that was the part that Dwyane played in just stabilizing LeBron. Because the part that, everybody talks about, Chris Bosh had all the sacrifices to make and all that. Yes, all that's true on the court. And yes, obviously off the court, his family moved as well. But with LeBron, it was all a huge change because he hadn't been outside of Ohio. It was Akron, it was Cleveland, and that's it, right? And so to not bring his family that first year, so they didn't want to have, quote unquote distractions. Plus it was a quick turnaround. To not sort of instead of be in that middle ground of, all right, I know I'm the best player on this team, or I believe I'm the best player on this team, but is it my team? Should I just sort of fall in line? And how do I do that? Because would I hold back in that scenario? Like, I don't understand. And then to not have really outside of the team a built-in support system, because the rest of the country hated him and he didn't expect that. And so Dwyane there was just very much sort of a calming, force for him, a calming voice for him. Like Dwyane is one of the rare superstars in the league. Like when you go back, he did not create problems. Like he was just a very solid teammate at all times. And early on, he didn't want to be a vocal guy. It wasn't until like maybe after Shaq left where they sort of got that out of him. And yet, go with the flow and make life easier for people as you had some success as they come to you into your organization. And so that part, I think, and it's not so much because of who Dwyane was, it was more of, I didn't really get in the moment just how sort of vulnerable LeBron was. And I think, looking back, it becomes a lot more obvious when you talk to people about it.
What were your feelings about the formation of the Big Three? I don't know if you've addressed it in the podcast, but I did find a link to a story you wrote when you were with the Herald, kind of referencing that you didn't think it was good for the league regarding the formation.
What a column that was! I think what I wrote, and this was going into, if I remember correctly, going into the decision, it was one of those very defensive. Miami doesn't need him. It was one of those. It might not be great for the NBA. The Heat will be just fine with Dwyane. You don't want to take away Dwyane's shine. It was a bunch of that. Just trying to find a different angle, but also just preparing people. Hey, maybe he doesn't come here. Maybe and everything will be okay. And so maybe that's kind of where I was with it at the time. But especially now, looking back, it was a huge upgrade for the league. It was, it was taking a guy like LeBron James, who, and this is just the example I'm using. You can use Kevin Garnett, you can use anybody. Let's use Kevin Garnett then. A guy like Kevin Garnett, who at the time, up until 11 years, was basically, unless you were an NBA super fan and just loved talent, you weren't going to really appreciate or even watch Kevin Garnett because he was in Minnesota. And unless he's playing the Lakers in the playoffs, like you're not really going to be able to appreciate that. You get LeBron James going from that market to this market in Miami to that market in LA. And it's like everybody can appreciate him. And so I think it grows the league in that way. It's like, oh, wow, I'm looking at Zion Williamson, not thinking, hey, that guy's going to spend his career with the Pelicans. If I'm a Knicks fan, I'm thinking, give me 6 years and that guy's going to be in my uniform. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of that stuff really intrigues the fans. Now, it has taken away from the on-court product because all of the off-court stuff is so interesting and people want to talk about that. And maybe that's where, you lose a little bit of the purity of the game in terms of the fandom. But, I would say my mind has changed from back then until now, but I think it changed a lot sooner. It wasn't, a decade after. It was probably like while we were going through it, I was just like, you know what, this is probably good for the league. It definitely expanded what was sort of the glamour franchises because Miami's, officially in that group.
Today's episode of Locked On Heat is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you're going to land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you could spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. LeBron gets so much credit, and should, for the player empowerment thing and making the decision the way that he did. But Dwyane Wade made a decision on ESPN also, along with Chris Bosh. I think it was during a PTI segment, if I don't.
It was during Sports Center, but it was Michael Wilbon who was hosting the interview.
There it is. That's what I was thinking. How much should this factor into Dwyane Wade's legacy, the player empowerment stuff, all of that, because of how much you were talking about how big of a factor he was in all of that, making LeBron comfortable with doing it? You know, I think LeBron is obviously the poster child, but how much should this factor into D Wade's legacy?
A ton, a lot. And I go back to the post-game press conference, post-series press conference against the Celtics in 2009, after that Game 5 in Boston, where he said, this is going to be the first time I'm out in the first round, or the last time I'm out in the first round in a long time, I'll tell you that. And that was before LeBron James got knocked out of the playoffs against the Boston Celtics in the second round. So there was no certainty, because if LeBron wins a championship in Cleveland, he's staying in Cleveland, right? So to Dwyane, it wasn't, I'm definitely going to be teammates with LeBron and Chris next year. It's, I'm just going to get somebody because I'm too good to be wasting my talents here. I know what I can do championship-wise. I did it with the Shaquille O'Neal, who was on the tail end of his career-ish. And so get me guys in their prime, I know we can win again. And so that declaration, while it probably had LeBron and Chris Bosh in mind, was no certainty whatsoever that it was those two. So I think in his mind, he'd had a plan, probably had a backup plan. And I think what he sort of put out there for people is, hey, you got a really good superstar in an attractive city, you could probably get people to come to you. You don't have to be in the Lakers, Celtics, or you don't have to be the Knicks, or you don't have to be LeBron level, although Dwyane would consider himself LeBron level in 2008 and 2009. But you don't have to be that to say, okay, I can get people to come to me and form a really cool team over here. And I think that's what he effectively did, because if you really look at it, like we said, he had a huge part in that whole coming together.
Going back to 2003, you kind of mentioned it off the cuff there, but the fact that he was kind of cast as a point guard, and it just, so many people forget the kind of just ambiguity of that season with Pat stepping down, Stan taking over. You draft this kid out of Marquette, you're really not sure. And of course, that's the era of the really big point guard, the really big shooting guard because of Michael Jordan. And here this guy is barely 6'3", if anything, and you're not quite sure where to cast him, but you kind of just have to play him. Do you ever consider how differently his career might have gone? I mean, he just has this incredible level of talent that seems to kind of trump that. But at the same time, we've seen this with so many players in NBA history where they're miscast or they're on a weird team and they just can't seem to find their place. And then all of a sudden, despite all this talent, we might not have seen a Hall of Fame level career.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember, well, there's two things I remember most vividly about that draft night. Was one, actually it wasn't draft night. This was lottery night. Lottery night, I remember sort of pumping my fist when the Heat didn't get the number 1 pick because I didn't want to deal with everything that come with covering LeBron. But then on draft night, I remember hearing the Pat Riley story of him talking about being on a treadmill or a bike, I'm not sure, sweating, watching the regional final of his team, Kentucky, against Dwyane Wade and Marquette. And Dwyane had that triple-double in that game. And that's when, Pat said, we got to get that guy. And whether that is a true story or not, in my mind, I was like, man, he just fell in love with the dude because he did well against his team. Like, how good is this guy? Like, we don't know how his skills are going to translate. I don't think I saw him shoot a jumper in that game. Like, no idea. Absolutely clueless. Like, I remember just thinking to myself, oh, Pat really wanted to take Chris Kaman. I'm glad he didn't, but he really wanted to take Chris Kaman. He really wanted Chris Bosh. He's in love with the big guy. Like, seems like he's settled for this kid. And then, and then you've got Stan. So it's not Pat coaching him. You've got Stan. You've got the big Lamar Odom acquisition, and you've got Eddie Jones. So if he is going to be a point guard, well, you got Lamar Odom as your point forward, right? You're talking about Magic Johnson type of skills from Lamar Odom. And then you've got effectively your franchise two guard, your all-star two guard in Eddie Jones. Like, where's this guy going to fit in? And, credit to Stan and just to everybody, like with Dwyane, he was going to find a way to fit in. The fact that, even at the end of his career, he would have been miscast as a point guard, and yet he spent the first year of his career doing just fine at that position. And so, it was crazy how that all played out, but it couldn't, I think many other organizations couldn't have given him the sudden success that he had because, Pat Riley turned an Anthony Carter mistake into Lamar Odom, and then turned Lamar Odom into, well, Bill Ferran, the strength coach at the time, helped turn Lamar Odom into a beast, but he had a beast of a season, and then he turned Lamar Odom into Shaq. And then all of a sudden, Dwyane Wade, I remember going into Team USA practices and stuff in 2004, and everybody's like, you don't got to worry about him. He's got big fella. And he was just kind of smiling, like shy in the background. I was like, yeah, I know. What am I going to do? I got lucky. I got this guy coming in next year. And so, the way that they turned that superstardom just ability into a championship in 3 years, like you don't see that very often with these young players, these top 5 draft picks. That's why after year 7, they're almost all asking for trades.
I'm looking at Wade's career in a lot of different ways, and one of the things that jumps out to me kind of looking back at it is that year 1 to year 2 leap where he went from like kind of interesting rookie, well, very good rookie who led the Heat to an interesting and surprising playoff berth to, and you get Shaq, and that obviously helps elevate the entire team around Dwyane Wade. But Dwyane Wade's elevation, I don't think is talked about enough from year 1 to year 2. That leap that he made, just as quality of a player, put the Heat on the map as legit contenders. Again, from plucky, surprising playoff team to legit title contenders. I can't really recall seeing a leap from a rookie to a sophomore quite like that. And it's pretty amazing. I don't really have a question on that. I just wonder if you have...
Well, no, and it's actually making me think about it too, because I haven't really thought about it in that light very much, because it just seemed to me it was going to be automatic. Like you get the big fella, you get him with another year of experience. And I remember that off season. Was that off season? It was the previous off season. I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of those first 2 seasons, off seasons, where, Dwyane was telling me he was doing dunks he's never done before. So he was like just feeling himself in terms of physical ability. And so to go from that first year to that second year, I just kind of knew it was going to be great. What I didn't know is just how, well, maybe I had an inkling just from the first year, but just how instinctive of a passer he was, specifically for big guys. And so he already had that ability, but then you have the biggest or the best lob option in the league in Shaq on your team. Then it just sort of really helped that particular skill. That part, I wasn't so sure that he would be such a perfect teammate for Shaq, because, coming off of the Kobe thing, everybody was just like, "Well, you better give Shaq the ball, or else he's going to be pissed." And so you could. I remember watching Shaq all the time in half court possessions and looking to see if he would ever show body language that would show aggravation toward Dwyane. I just don't remember seeing it ever, because Dwyane was constantly looking for him, and he would always say it. And it wasn't until that second playoff run where Dwyane really fulfilled his sort of superstardom and just won that championship, where Shaq was even okay with deferring. And it wasn't until later in the playoffs where it was obvious. It's like, oh wow, Shaq's got to defer to this kid. So that second year was such a big leap. But I remember not being surprised by it. In fact, I don't even remember like thinking in terms of most improved players, which rookies, so sophomore years don't usually do that very much. But it just felt like it was supposed to happen.
One more thing off the court, though, like the thing with Dwyane that kind of stands out to me is also just the maturation process. Like you hear interviews from him when he was just such a young player. And of course, it's just a byproduct of getting older, but how he just changed just in dealing with the media and being able to speak more comfortably. And of course, his evolution off the court and so many issues that he's involved with, and just being a face for the league. But what was that like, covering that and seeing this young player kind of undergo that transformation, not just on the court, but also off the court as well?
I mean, I kind of just love that stuff, so especially I didn't know how long I would be doing that, but it was at the time a dream job. So I was probably going to be there for years and years. And so I was pay attention to the evolution. Like, I mean, full disclosure, like I grew up here. And so before I decided to become a journalist, I was a Heat fan. I was, I was a Pat Riley guy. I was a Lazo and even before that, Glenn Rice. And so I'm intrigued by a guy who's playing for, the team that I grew up watching. I'd already been programmed to not be a fan as a professional, but it's my team, if you will. And so there's nothing to me in sports more fun outside of there's two things. There's the shocking championship run like Heat and there's almost did this year. And then you get the young guy you get to watch blossom into a superstar. It's even more fun to me when it's unexpected, right? It's the LeBron versus Dwyane. One you knew was going to be that. The other one you didn't know when it came out of nowhere. And so watching him, the first year he was just, again, trying to recognize how good he could be in this league because he didn't know. And then the second year, it was a lot of Shaq really forcing him, letting him know, hey, you're the man. Like, you are great, and you're going to have to own that. The same way Kobe owned that from the second he stepped on the court, you're going to have to own that. And you saw he gave him the Flash nickname. I remember one time I was asking Shaq. He was asking me, it was early in the season before he announced the nickname. And he was like, oh, what do you think? What do you think the nickname's going to be? And I was like, I don't know, D Wade. I came up with the corniest thing. And he goes, that's ghetto. That's nonsense. He goes, listen, Flash. And I was like, okay. When he told me, I was like, all right, if you think that's going to catch it caught on. and he became a Flash. And so the next year, the championship year, I remember see the clip all the time where he was like, we're going to have the biggest parade ever. And I was like, you can see how young the kid in him is still there, right? And it wasn't until after that, when things started to get bad, he had the shoulder injury, he had seasons that weren't the best, he started to have to answer questions of failure, answer questions of, are you going to shoot a 3-pointer next year? Like, that's going to, like, he was missing that. It's like, if he would have shot a 3, would have been the best player ever. And so he started, like, picking that stuff up and recognizing, okay, I'm going to have to answer these tough questions. And I remember one time asking him, like, about the leadership role. And he's like, I don't know if I'm ready to do that yet. I don't know if I want to do that yet. I might not be that guy yet. I'm going to have to step into it. But he was very honest about who he was and what he was ready for. And, again, fortunately, his second and third year and, into his fourth and a little bit of his fifth, he had Shaq next to him. But at the same time, Shaq, and he'll even admit it, was probably not the greatest mentor for a guy of Dwyane Wade's age and coming up, because Shaq was very Shaq-centric. Like, it was all the world revolved around Shaq. And I don't think Dwyane necessarily was that type of person. I think you see that in him now. He's very selfless. He's a giving person and doesn't necessarily love to be in the spotlight alone. He can be in the spotlight with others joking around, but not alone. And I think that it sort of shaped him to recognize what kind of leader he wanted to be, because he was able to take his time in becoming one. And then all of a sudden, by the time he established himself as a leader, he gets LeBron and Chris Bosh as teammates, and then it becomes sort of a collaborative thing where everybody, now he still had more of a role because it was his organization, if you will, right, but it was a collaborative thing. Hey, we're all in the same year, same rookie class. We all, respect this head coach, but we all know he's in his third year, so let's help each other out. And it was more what he was comfortable with, group leadership, collaborative leadership, but still, his peers, not just random people. And also Udonis.
Yeah.
I love that. That was awesome. I'm so glad you can kind of take us back behind the curtain there, behind the reporting, and just what it was like covering him. This was great. We have a few more questions. It's basically called the Flashcard Round. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a lightning round. We're going to jump right in. You mentioned that you grew up in Miami. You are the perfect person to answer this question. Mount Rushmore, Miami athletes, assuming Dwyane Wade is on it.
Yeah. Dwyane Wade, Dan Marino, Locks, athletes, right? Not coaches. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, this is a heck of a question, because I have a bit of a hockey blind spot, but they also haven't really done anything since they've been here. I've got to put a baseball player on there, and I mean, but they haven't stuck around long enough, right? Because
That's tough, right?
like the
Could you
first
put
thought is
Cabrera there?
Cabrera, but he's only
Right.
there for a little while. Josh Beckett because he won a World
Jeff
Series.
Jeff Conine.
But I mean, just because of his popularity, it wasn't because of performance. Like
Yeah.
to me, the first person I think of when I think of Marlins star that stayed around Gary Sheffield. But I'm not putting him on the Mount Rushmore. Maybe that's just because I'm, a little older. So I don't even know if you can put a baseball player on that thing.
Dontrell Willis?
No,
Dontrell Willis?
No?
Nah.
Flash in the pan.
Yeah, flash in the pan. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know who to put on there on the baseball team. This is kind of scary for me. Like Al Leiter?
No.
He can't be on there. You could just not do baseball.
Right. You can't because, I mean, you had an MVP in Giancarlo Stanton, but he was barely around. So
Right, yeah.
I don't think you can. I think you've got to put Alonzo Mourning on there because of everything he did while he was there and then coming back and winning a championship. And then even though it's a bonus, just that he's still with the organization. So I think that's my top three.
You probably need a 70s Dolphins player.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's got to be it. It's got to be whoever that safety was, that Jake 13. What is his name?
Jake Scott?
Jake Scott, maybe. But
You go
I don't
Zonka.
know. Because if they put Zonka on there, it's probably recognizable, right? But if you put Jake Scott on there, I'm not recognizing his face.
No matter how big it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, here, I'll throw in number 4 for me. I don't care if it was only 4 years, LeBron James.
There we go.
Ooh.
2 championships.
That's fine.
Hot take. I like it. Chris Bosh, honorable mention. All right, flashcard round. That was number 1. Number 2, rank the top 3 or 4, maybe 5 shooting guards of all time.
Well, it's funny because I love Jerry West. I love talking to him. It's crazy that he knows who I am. But I never watched him play enough to really have a strong opinion. Like I gotta go back on the footage and just watch him. But Michael Jordan, Dwyane Wade, Kobe Bryant, Jerry West, and
Does it even matter? You've got
really
Dwyane over
doesn't.
Kobe.
I mean, there's so many.
But you have Dwyane over Kobe.
I have Dwyane and Kobe essentially like neck and neck. Like just depends on what you want, right? Yeah. More efficiency with Dwyane, little better on-ball defense with Kobe, more variety in his offense with Kobe, which you could say is a detriment because it probably led to a little bit of a field goal ineffectiveness, right? Because he knew he could make those shots and lefty sweeping hooks and stuff like that. But I just think it's just what you like and what you want differently. I'm actually in agreement with Dwyane as a side note that if he goes back to his college years and properly deals with his meniscus instead of rushing through it, that he is probably in the GOAT discussion. Like if you go back to that 2008, 2009 stretch before LeBron got there, and watch those two go at it. Like they were peers. And LeBron will tell you that. I know, obviously, he's not going to admit, he was better than me or whatever, but they were on the same level. And I think if he didn't have those injuries, A, they probably went 4 out of 4 in that Big 3 era. And B, he is in that discussion for greatest of all time. He was that good.
I think we're all in agreement there. And you answered the greatest what if in Dwyane Wade's career there. Last one. Can you build a super team, a perfect super team, a championship contender with current NBA players around prime Dwyane Wade? So you got prime Dwyane Wade and then 4 current NBA players. You pick.
Prime Dwyane Wade and then 4.
You have to stay out of the second luxury tax apron. Just kidding.
So you said no,
I'm just kidding. You don't have to do the math.
Current NBA players, right?
Current NBA players.
Oh my goodness. Hang on. Let me throw up a quick standings here because I don't want to skip anybody because this is actually a fun question. Don't normally get too many of these. I think at the point guard spot,
right?
Well, at the point guard spot specifically, and I'm thinking and this is just because it's Dwyane. You remember his point guard in college, Travis Diener was his name, right?
Sure. Yeah.
He was such a good shooter, and they were so good together. So I'm trying to think of I like Fred VanVleet. I'll start Fred VanVleet at point guard. Okay. I don't think because we're building a super team. They're not all multiple time All-Stars, right? It's probably
You
like
can
a
do
big
whatever
three
you
and then
want.
2 more.
All
right.
Yeah. Do whatever you want.
Very good.
Yeah.
Man, I want him with Nikola Jokic. I do want him with Jokic because
that would be
I think as a passer together, but that means he needs an athletic 4-man who defends more. So I'm putting him next to Bam, and he already knows how to throw lobs to Bam. And so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 already, right?
Yep.
And so I need a small forward here, and this is probably the toughest one because you want to find a guy who can be a little bit plug and play, right? So the first thought is put KD there as a 3-man and say Dwyane can play with him and he doesn't quote unquote need to handle the ball as much, right? So I think that's probably who I'm going with. I like Dwyane with oddly Fred VanVleet. And I just like his personality too. I think Fred is just kind of no nonsense. If it's an open shot, I mean, I feel like 90% of the time he's going to make that shot. And it's just, he doesn't have any big ego. And I think that's a perfect sidekick for Dwyane. So I think, right now off the cuff, that's my squad.
Nice. I love it. Was not expecting the Fred VanVleet appearance when I asked that question, but hey, that's why they pay the big bucks. It's for the hot takes. LeBron James on the Mount Rushmore. That's why we do it. Israel Gutierrez of ESPN, we really appreciate you coming on. Make sure to check out the podcast. 4 years of Heat available wherever it is that you get your podcast. Do highly recommend that one. Thanks, man. This is fun.
No problem. I'll put a rookie on the bench, Amen Thompson, because I think he's going to be a stud.
There it is.
And he doesn't cost
much.
Wow.
6 man.